When I hear the elderly give out their ideas on how to navigate the modern world and achieve success, I realize how detrimental the fluoride in our water supply has been. And what makes it worse, instead of knowing that these ideas are obvious to everybody else, they feel like they cracked a code. They were in the lab for 30 years running some sort of experiment trying to find these exact answers, and they're ready to share it with us.
Have you tried buying less iced coffee?
You can't find a job. Have you tried handing your application to the CEO?
I know you have a degree in computer science, but have you tried applying for McDonald's?
That's what my first job was.
And there's probably nobody more guilty of doing this than Dave Ramsey.
But Dave, you don't understand. I'm already working 60 hours a week just to put food on the table for my family.
Well, there you go. There's 168 hours in a week, Buttercup. Sounds like you have a little bit of time left over.
Sure.
The man who built an empire on telling broke people that they're broke because of their own choices, and it seems like Gen Z is his new favorite target. He's one of the few 60-somethings still grabbing a podcast mic and competing in today's space, and I'll give him credit where it's due. If you're drowning in credit card debt and you need someone to slap some sense into your spending habits, Ramsey is genuinely one of the best people at doing that. His baby steps plan has helped a lot of people out of financially catastrophic situations, and I can't take that away. But that's pretty much where the glaze stops, because the second he opens his mouth and gives his opinion about how young people should be building wealth or a life for themselves, it's like watching someone who's great at cleaning teeth try to perform brain surgery. It's not your strong suit, Dave. And look, people have been saying for a while now that Ramsey has been out of touch, especially when he went on a rant about how millennials and Gen Zs are just staying at their home, doing nothing, wanting more handouts. But he recently showed his age again by saying that the path to success in 2026 looks something like starting a pressure washing business, going to coding school, and landing a $150K a year job. I could spend an entire video talking about the lie that is just learn to code, bro, and the multitude of issues it's caused in our modern world, but I found a tweet that pretty much sums up my thoughts better than a long form video could. The post reads, "You spent $3,000 on a pressure washer to land a $600 pressure washing job? That's right, Dave. But a Mexican took the job for $100? That's correct, Dave. So you spent $22,000 on coding school, but the coding jobs are all taken by Indians and AI? That's right, Dave." I'm not gonna lie, I laughed way too hard at this when I saw this the first time. In my head, it makes no sense why the people who work the least in our world make all the decisions that affect everybody else, and at the same time have the most to say about modern work and where it stands. It's no surprise why a vast majority of Americans feel like their country is actively trying to push them into poverty. That's the point. This isn't really a Ramsey thing. This is a larger issue. When I look at the boomers, I don't understand how we got to this point, because they had a model of what being a decent person was. The silent generation, their literal parents, the same ones that were shaped by the Great Depression, the 2 world wars they lived through, a group that really understood scarcity, understood sacrifice, believed in building institutions and investing in infrastructure, and they deeply understood that society is something that you have to maintain, not just for yourself, but for the people who come after you. And the boomers inherited the world that came out of that, the largest share of the pie ever, the strongest middle class in American history, subsidized education, cheap housing, union jobs, handed to them on a platter. And how did they repay the generation that went to war, pushed back on business, and forced the government to be more inclusive? Well, by pulling the ladder up so fast that even the Gen Xers felt the effects. They went from the children of warriors to the most bureaucratic class of people the modern world has ever produced. The generation that was supposed to carry the torch instead figured out how to commodify it, and somewhere in between buying their third rental property and figuring out how to live forever, they decide the problem with young people today is that we just don't have enough grit, not enough gumption to pull ourselves up by those bootstraps. And I want to be fair here. Not all of them are like this. The boomers in my life have shaped who I am and how I view the world. I thank them often for the real wisdom they passed on to me. And I admire how people of an older age can really lead by example because their life shows what they've lived. And that made me always appreciate people like my neighbor Pete, this Italian guy with a huge family, always in his garden garden and even made his own marinara sauce from tomatoes he grew himself. Like, that's super Italian. But the biggest thing that stood out about Pete was the way he judged people on their character. A story I'll never forget is about how Pete secured my aunt and uncle the family house. After arriving to America and saving up for a couple years, my aunt and uncle were looking to buy a house and wanted to move somewhere safer and a little bit nicer to raise the 4 kids they had at the time. After finding their dream home in Skokie, Illinois, and doing the paperwork to acquire that home, they kept running into an issue with the HOA that kept finding reasons to deny them. And let's just say these reasons didn't have a lot to do with their finances, but everything to do with the fact that they weren't like everybody else. On one of the days they were going to attend an HOA meeting, they ran into Pete and told him the situation that they were going through. I'm not sure what that conversation was about because I wasn't there, but whatever was said during that conversation would lead Pete to do everything in his power to make sure my aunt and uncle were able to secure that house. I mean, he even went around the neighborhood with a pen and a petition that he made himself to gather support for my family. Genuinely one of the realest people I've ever known in my life. It's crazy to think that if he didn't do that I would have probably grown up on the south side of Chicago in the early 2000s and would have been in like a Chief Keef video or something with nothing to lose. But when they asked Pete all these years later why he did this, he said the story of our family wanting to make it in America reminded him of his own. And I guess that's the difference in the boomer class, the Petes and the Ramseys. They're damn near the same age, but the way they view the world is completely different. And I guess that's kind of the whole message with this. It's never really about the generation, but it's about the message. Because the geriatric class of America that has decided to partner with crony capitalism and corporate interests, they're making a pact with the devil. And the history is pretty consistent on what happens next. When you don't pour into the youth and neglect your surroundings, eventually the greed that is causing your overconsumption will be the thing that takes you out. I mean, just look at Canada. They've released a report suggesting that if more elderly people opted for assisted death, that it would probably save the healthcare system and the economy. It's crazy to think that people who built a system around squeezing out every last drop of productivity are now starting to understand the math on what happens when you're no longer productive. And with how broken the healthcare system is in America, it's not exactly rocket science to understand where this road is going to lead. You can't be in charge forever. You can't keep pushing a generation into disaster, hanging a golden carrot above their head, and expecting it all just to work out. It just further cements the damage that's already been caused, and at some point, the people holding the carrots, promising change, have to reckon with the fact that people chasing it are exhausted, and they're running out of reasons to keep chasing. But I guess old people nagging on what the right thing to do pisses me off just a little bit more than a lot of the things I deal with, because just like my aunt and uncle and Pete, I have to deal with the HOA in my neighborhood. If I deal with this point of view, this nonsense, every single week at these pointless meetings, you want to talk about peaked in high school? If you have an HOA, go sit in one of their meetings. Absolutely zero self-awareness about how insufferable the whole thing is. If property management was a religion, it'd probably have the largest subsect of boomers known to man, because how do you discuss how tall you can cut your grass for 2 hours? And on top of having zero self-awareness, they also have no remorse. They'll fine you $500 just because you decided to wash your own car in your own driveway. And yes, this has happened to me. Anywhere you go, you really can't escape the reach of boomers unless you leave the country, and that's not really an option for most people who aren't already working remotely. But even when you leave the country, you start realizing that this isn't uniquely an American thing either. The boomer problem is global. It's just at different stages depending on where you look. I would say that Canada is in the terminal stages of this problem. They would get too much pushback to change the laws, so they're just straight up giving boomers the option to self-delete, while Europe is showing what will happen to America if we don't act sooner on this issue and at least have an honest conversation about what's going on. And that's what I want to be clear about. This doesn't have to be a generational war. The framing doesn't really get us anywhere, and it doesn't produce better answers, nor does it implement any real solutions. All it does is shield the actual core of the issue, which is reckless financiers pulling the strings while everyone argues about who's to blame. I don't really dislike Dave Ramsey. I've watched some of his clips and he's pretty funny sometimes. And if I had to think of a boomer that I didn't like, it's probably Jerome Powell or Donald Trump, maybe even Nancy Pelosi. Rad Paul is pretty high on the list, but then again, so is Chuck Schumer. And if you're wondering why I'm just blurting out names of politicians, it's because I will never miss an opportunity to point to the fact that we need term limits more than ever. We have let a generation of people turn our government into essentially a pension. All the benefits go to the people who are no longer putting into the system. More than half of our mandatory spending yearly goes towards Medicare and Social Security alone. Someone made this in a comparison I watched a while ago. They said that the boomers treat their kids like how Kronos treated his kids, where essentially Kronos ate his kids so that they didn't surpass him. And with every facet of life, boomers are doing the same thing. A great example of this is the housing market. With no buyers left to sell to, boomers refuse to act any differently on the housing market and insist on flexing a home value that can never be realized. I mean, think about that for a second. We've never seen a housing market that is solely trying to get by selling homes to 60-year-olds and shell corporations. Calling it a joke would be scratching the surface, and that's why I'm simply asking for just a honest conversation about the situation, because if things aren't honest and met from a place of understanding, then the solutions that will come when a Gen Zer or a millennial eventually take over and the generational divide is even larger than it is today are going to be changes that will cause even 60-year-olds to rebel. I'm talking about the nuclear option, cutting spending to Social Security and Medicaid. Social Security is something that I've accepted that I'm probably not going to see in my lifetime. That was a joke that we would say even when I was a kid in middle school. So it's no skin off my back, and this wouldn't even have to be a conversation if boomers didn't also actively try to dismantle all the safety nets that they utilize today. And that's the part that gets me every time. They want these things and these benefits that they depend on so much, but every single step of the way, they voted to cut taxes that fund them, dismantle the safety net that supported them, and cheer on the politicians who promise to shrink the very government that they are damn near indentured to. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like making this video is going to change anything. It's not really why I made it. I made it because sometimes you just need somebody to say out loud what everybody is already feeling, but can't quite put into words. I say this a lot. The system is not broken by accident, and the people benefiting from it are not going to fix it voluntarily. That's just the reality of the times we're operating in. But by understanding that side, you start to see more of it. You stop blaming yourself for not keeping up with the illusions. Understand why the race was rigged before you even tied your shoes. Pete knew this and knew the importance of fighting back. To him, that looked like showing up with a pen and a piece of paper and with a voice they couldn't silence. I'm not sure what that looks like for you, but it probably starts with just being honest about what's actually happening in front of you. It's okay to feel like you're being sold out. If this was any other time in history, a revolution would have probably happened by now. The things that Dave Ramsey said about going into pressure washing to start your future comes from a good place. It's just one that's about 10 years too late. I mean, I'm really trying hard to not feel like it's all the boomers' fault, but from economics to tolerance, the world would just be so much different if they didn't have so much power. But with that being said, if you agree or disagree, let me know down below in the comments. I do read the comments. Do you think boomers' brains are just calcified beyond belief because of the fluoride, or can meaningful change be achieved? If you haven't already, like and subscribe to join the channel and make sure my dog gets his treats. And with that being said, thank you for tuning in. Until next time.